Rise and fall of a literary genius. Some programmes for Sunday night on Anglia.
Is Robert Mitchum a hero or a coward? Find out in our film The Enemy Below in half an hour. That's right after The Human Factor.
Throughout most of the year, he appears to be a perfectly normal creature, except for the fact that he reads these weird books and magazines with funny covers, where you can see people drifting around in space. Apart from this, he seems perfectly okay, perfectly ordinary, nice guy, goes to the office 5 or 6 days a week. Once a year, he climbs up the Golden Hill in his dirty little Macintosh. And when he gets to the top, there is a golden castle labeled Metropole Hotel, 45th World Science Fiction Convention. He gets in there, he pulls off his dirty Mac, and he becomes a different, radiant creature among other creatures like him. That's the secret of the science fiction fan. Once a year, he has a transformation.
Fasten's here on the shoulder.
Yeah.
I can find the hook. There we go.
Summer '87 and some 6,000 science fiction fans from all over the world had their transformation in Brighton. Well, more of a celebration, really, of an art form which for many of its followers is as much a way of life as it is a branch of literature or a type of movie. Brian Aldiss, having just offered a tongue-in-cheek analysis of the science fiction fan, writes more seriously that science fiction is the search for a definition of man and his status in the universe. This film is less ambitious, seeking rather to discover what it is that appeals in science fiction to a handful of those who came to Brighton. First, another definition.
Science fiction gives you the opportunity to explore ideas, basically. It's a fiction of ideas. It's a fiction of, oh, I wonder what would happen if it didn't quite work out that way. I mean, you put it down and you've got science fiction. You can say, well, I wonder what would have happened if we lost against the Spanish Armada, and you've got science fiction. Or you can say, I wonder what would happen if we actually did manage to put a man on Mars, and you've got science fiction. It's a matter of wondering what if.
Oxfordshire schoolteacher Alison Cook did a lot of wondering what if when, as a little girl, she found that books like Black Beauty and What Katie Did held far less fascination for her than titles like Return to Mars or Death Rays of Ardilla. Her interest grew, and with it the feeling that she wasn't quite like everyone else. Then, Deliverance.
The first convention that I went to, it was a great relief. It was a bit like coming out. I had been a closet science fiction fan for a very, very long time, and I went along to the 79 Worldcon. You can just, if you tip it. It was like taking off a pair of tight corsets. It was such a relief to sit down and actually talk about science fiction and things connected with science fiction without getting ready for flinching from the comments that other people give you about the subject. Well, if I go into the local bookshop, the owner always looks up and says, coming in for some more rubbish, are you? When are you going to read some real books? I go to science fiction conventions because it's fun. I meet all my friends, I catch up on news, I see who's doing what and to whom, and play silly games and have an occasional drink. I feel very sorry for the straights in society who wash the car and just do the gardening and don't have that little extra eccentricity to do something else, something far away from everyday life, a bit of fantasy in your life.
A favourite fantasy in Alison Cook's life is to imagine herself in the surreal world of a particular Michael Moorcock novel, in which guilt, conventional morality and sin have no place. They've become irrelevant. Her costume, on which she's been working all year, is inspired by one of the characters in the book, and she'll wear it at the convention's masquerade. Moorcock's novel, which has inspired many of her costumes in the past, is called The Dancers at the End of Time.
At the end of time, it's the end of the Earth's history. The whole world is running down towards the final dissolution. Entropy has set in.
The fantasy world at the end of time is inhabited by the even more fantastic female, the Iron Orchid.
She's a very cool lady, the Iron Orchid. She is very sure of her own abilities. She glides through life. She has no problems whatsoever. Everything is a party or a game to her. And she can wear the most fantastic, unusual costumes. She might decide to colour her skin almost like a tattoo of flowers or whatever, have living flowers growing from her, because it is possible.
If the Iron Orchid's achievements take some beating, probably more impressive is Alison's own achievement in being able to play the role at all.
By the time I was 18, I was 17 stone 10. So I have lived through an adolescence when there were mini skirts and Twiggy was the greatest model, as in my fatitude. I'm a food alcoholic, a foodaholic. I'm still a foodaholic, I'm just very careful. I lost 7 stone just before my first convention, and basically I was very pleased to win that particular prize, because the prize was for the costume, but the prize was most beautiful, which was quite a buzz at the time, which made me go on. The Iron Orchid I'm doing a different costume for, because on the 29th of August, which is when the competition is, it is in fact my birthday, and I shall be 37, and if I don't want to start having to go in as the bug bladder beast from Trall, there is a certain age at which strutting about semi-clothed is not a good idea, and I'd rather finish on a high note than fade out gradually.
Like any loose grouping of this size, the convention has its mainstream and its fringe. 42nd Squadron is a fringe group of fans, here improvising a sort of space western in a local pub. It may not be everyone's cup of tea.
What planet are you from? I always like spaces.
Well, Pentridge space you had in mind.
Well, I know a little airlock.
Never mind things like...
Well, I say you can't. Oh, women!
We know that we are part of the matriarchal empire of Earth. We are the outer planetary squadron of the Imperial forces. 42nd Squadron is the crack squadron.
Pretty violent, wasn't it?
Yes, but nobody was hurt. It's fantasy. It looks violent, it sounds violent, it's very, very loud. But we all get up, we're all friends, nobody's damaged in any way, except for the eardrums of a couple of us.
Kate, what was all that about?
Technically a bar brawl. Otherwise better known as us having fun.
It was very odd.
That's what it was meant to be, because we are, normally.
It is, of course, the fans who like dressing up who attract most media attention. But they're still very much a minority. And among the more bookish fans, reaction to groups like 42nd Squadron ranges from outright derision to polite disdain.
I was walking down the street at lunchtime today and saw some people in full fancy dress walking towards me. And the first thing I did was take off my convention badge so I wouldn't be identified with them. They're very embarrassing. I find them so, but they enjoy it. And so long as they're not actually harming anybody, they can get on with it.
Founder member of 42nd Squadron, Geetha North, is a claims adjuster at the DHSS in Brighton. For her, the two activities are complementary.
I need to do the fantastic outside of work to cope with the job. It's a very stressful job. It's hard work. It's not intellectually stimulating. I need to be able to go away and do something absolutely, totally different so that I can come back on Monday relaxed instead of taking the work home with me in my brain.
It looks like a theatrical costume, isn't it? What is this?
Splendid, isn't it?
It's terrific.
That's my helmet for when we're doing fantasy battles.
What, I mean, was it a Viking helmet or something?
It's based on a Viking design, but it's using modern Celtic knotwork. See here, pentagram. That's from the Book of Kells, and a dragon.
Have you got a sword to go with it?
Should I see it?
Yeah, go on.
You know, we don't actually hit each other playing games with friends. But it makes a nice bang crash when you hit them together.
Is it a bit dangerous?
It can be if you're not careful. You need to be trained and you need to keep in practice, and we do occasionally get injuries, but they're usually minor.
You've never lost anyone?
No, no, never.
Why is it this preponderance of violence? Is it healthy?
Providing you're not putting it into action, yes. Why not? We find with the people I know who belong to reenactment societies who fight on the field in front of lots of people with steel swords, steel helmets, they don't need to go in a pub and hit somebody. Your average person who belongs to a group that practices violence for entertainment of a crowd has nothing to prove.
Has anybody ever said to you, yeah, but I mean, but it's a lot of fun. It's all a bit childish too.
Oh, it is. What's wrong with that? I'm adult enough to act like I want to, providing I am careful of other people's rights. Why should I be grown up and responsible? It's my leisure time. I can do what I want. I want to play.
Whether science fiction fulfills the same sort of deeper need for the fans who came to Brighton, as, say, an established religion, is debatable. But clearly there's more to it than just having fun. There was a light show, lots of film shows, meetings and more meetings. For guest writer Doris Lessing, who came here to discuss her work, yes, she does write science fiction, the convention had a very serious purpose indeed. For Brian Aldiss it did too, but not always.
This is the 45th World Science Fiction Convention, and we are in Brighton, England, or so we believe. Joyce and Ken Slater.
And then there were the fan guests of honour, Ken and Joyce Slater, who've been attending conventions and selling books at them for nearly 30 years. Back in the 30s, science fiction fans were something of an oppressed minority, a situation Ken Slater relished.
People who read science fiction were automatically classed with the same people who read pornography. You were expected to wear a scruffy Mac and keep your collar well up when you bought it. If you read it in the underground, you had to wrap it up in at least the Daily Mirror. Actually, I used to sit in the underground reading a copy of Astounding Science Fiction blatantly. If I could find a copy of Weird Tales, which was actually horror, with a Brundage cover, I'd read that even more blatantly because it actually looked like pornography.
If you were trying to describe what science fiction was, let's say to someone from another planet, and they'd never heard of it, what would you say?
Not easy to explain, but let's say it's a logical, scientifically based fairy story. One form of science fiction, I should say, stems from the traveller's tale. When you find an elephant skull over the hill, you come back to your own village, and you don't talk about that empty bone you found. You talk about the monster that was there, the Cyclops. And you develop a little bit how you killed it with a burning spear into its single eye hole, and actually the tusk mark. A lot of science fiction comes out of the traveller's tale, because when you came home from your adventures, even if it was only just over the hill to the next village, you just didn't say anything boring. You added something to it. You did if you had any imagination. And that's where one lot of science fiction started.
There doesn't seem much place for God in science fiction literature.
Oh, I think there's plenty of room for God. They can't get rid of him. They keep shoveling him out, and he comes in the back door. He comes in the airlock. He's always there. In the 40s, when science fiction was more like a secret movement than it is now, science fiction writers declared themselves formally to be atheists and humanists and rationalists, etc., etc. But that's gone by the board. A lot of science fiction has a lot of religion in it, in various ways. If they're not actually dealing with God, they're dealing with the gods or the prime mover of the universe. And this is simply a reflection of what has been going on elsewhere. I mean, scientists themselves in the 30s were supposed, if they were good scientists, they didn't believe in God. They had wiped out religion with a theory of evolution. But religion has crept back. It's nothing to see Sir Bernard Lovell going to church on a Sunday, as once it would have been. And I think that's what you find in science fiction now, that there's a lot of questioning of religion, but it's too an important bit of your imaginative life to leave out.
Conventional religions are not particularly imaginative, really. I mean, if you look at Ola Stapledon's 1930s philosophy on the creation of the overbeing, the supreme God, breeding up from all the races of the universe until they developed into one mind. You'll find in science fiction a lot of assorted religions. You'll find stories based on the Christian and the Hindu mythologies. And they're very often acceptable stories, even to people who are strongly religious.
A science fiction writer called Theodore Sturgeon, who died recently, coined what is called Sturgeon's Law, which, put crudely, is that 90% of everything is crap. And 90% of science fiction is crap. But the good stuff is very good.
And there's a readership in science fiction fandom, as they call themselves, hungry for books. Science fiction fans devour literature. Paul Kincaid himself is considered a slow reader because he only gets through 1 or 2 books a week, against what he says is an average diet of 1 or 2 books a day. But how else do you define a typical science fiction fan?
I don't know if this definition extends across all forms of fandom. I know it covers the sort of people you'll see in this room, the science fiction, the fanzine fans and the convention fans.
The fanzines are...
The fanzines are the amateur magazines put out by fans. They can be full of fiction, or they can be full of news, or they can be full of anecdotes. It doesn't matter, it's just a way of keeping in contact with people when you're not seeing them directly. The average fanzine fan is either an only child or a first child. The vast majority of them are male. They are usually upper middle class, both in background and in income. There's a lot of money here. There are a lot of people earning an awful lot of money. They're usually in white-collar jobs, like computer programmers, public relations, journalists.
Which doesn't quite sum up Kate Solomon. She wasn't an only child, and she's not yet, at any rate, earning a great deal of money as a mature student of English literature at Cambridge University. She's also preparing for the masquerade, her costume representing Spencer's Fairy Queen, but her childhood and adolescent experiences are quite typical.
I was quite a sort of bookish child, I suppose, and reclusive sounds such an extreme state. I wouldn't say I was reclusive, but I suppose I was a bit antisocial. I mean, at school, for instance, you would have a group of us, and people might be talking about who'd been seen snogging who at last night's disco, and I'd just pipe up about some book I'd read, and in the book I read last week there was triffids everywhere, or all the men had died off, or something, and people would sort of look and sort of, what? And then sort of turn back and sort of glaze over and sort of, oh, she's off again.
But somewhere out there were people whose eyes wouldn't glaze over at Kate's enthusiasm, and at last she met some at a Star Trek convention in Leeds, at 17, a turning point.
I just remember it was wonderful. It was completely different from what I was used to. I mean, I came from a background where, you know, what was interesting was next Saturday night and the disco, and, you know, by the time you got to 18, really, you were just looking for the baby to come along, and there wasn't really much else in life, much interest in life for most people, and here all these people were interested in all the arcane things that I was. They were all fascinated by alien life forms, the future, human condition, Mr. Spock. These are people whose friendship I will really enjoy. These are really nice people, you know, these are people that I understand. And that was really quite unique for me. I'd never really been in that position before.
Fandom is almost like a family. It's a lot of people with similar views and similar outlooks on life, almost banding together as a minority against the rest of the world.
I was very introverted as a child. I mean, one thing about finding science fiction fandom is that I've become a lot more extrovert. I mean, the sitting at home and reading is something I still do, but I also go out and do things, and I do a lot of things. I enjoy life to the full.
I think that its sort of concealed objective is to make everyone, for a few hours at least, happier and better than they were before. You see, one thing that you notice is that there are always two themes running through the convention. There's the rigid, structured timetable of events, and everyone thinks it's very important that they should start on time and end on time. And a lot of attention is paid to this timetabling. And this is the the skeleton of the anatomy of a convention. But at the same time, there's the dark side, because the program stops more or less as sun sets. And then the werewolf blood gets circulating and people start to go to parties.
Like the masquerade in which some 40 contestants are taking part. This is just the audience.
December 24th, 2011 AD. The great cycle of the Mayan calendar.
I thought that there was less militarism here this year, and certainly one way in which the masquerade has changed quite noticeably is that there was no horror this time.
Targus is the chieftain of the Bark tribe, one of the tribes of the ferocious four-armed green warriors who wander across the...
I seem to remember a lot of victims of Dracula, you know, or chaps who would actually make no attempt really to be in fancy dress, but they would strip off a bit, would go around semi-naked with stakes through their hearts and tomato ketchup running down into the loincloth. There was quite a lot of that sort of rather gruesome thing. Or just people kind of being funny and having notices around their neck saying, "I'm not here." You know, this kind of thing that doesn't really work for more than a microsecond.
I want mine to be really good. I want to, when I make a costume, I want everyone to admire it. I want it to be absolutely beautiful and to have the image I'm kind of putting over exactly right. You know, I'm a perfectionist. If I win a prize, this is a signal that maybe I did it right. So yes, in a sense, yeah, I guess I'd like to win.
It's a personal, secret pleasure to me that I can create a personality for an evening, which, say, the following day I can be standing next to somebody discussing the costume in a bar, and they don't know who I am, and it affords me a great deal of secret pleasure.
For jewelry and reptile skin, Dougal Dixon, Taras Tarkas. For peacock tail and electronics, number 21, Alison Cook, The Iron Orchid.
It was a bit like a swan, that costume. It's beautiful on the outside, but what I can only describe as an appliance. It's got a leather pocket at the back to take the tail, and strapped to each of my legs at the back were 16 U2 batteries.
So, success for Alison, but no joy this time for Kate. Plenty of generosity, though.
Did you see the ones who did win? That's why I didn't win. They were very, very good.
They were terrific.
You actually see there's about half a dozen to a dozen here that would look great in a Rio Carnival or anything. They may not be as big, but they're absolutely magnificent and beautifully imaginative.
Costumes apart, the bedrock of science fiction is the literature. But it's also true that many people look down on science fiction writing.
I think that there's a lot of class snobbery about science fiction. We haven't produced any Shakespeares as yet, and there's a feeling that it's a sort of sub-literature. I don't think that's so at all. I mean, I live, let's say I have to live in the conviction that by the 21st or the 22nd century, people looking back are going to say the science fiction writers were the people that had the 20th century right. That ghastly century was only described by science fiction writers. It could only be described in non-realistic and fantastic terms.